Chapter 131, Cold Branches. At that moment, Jiang Xuaning's blood seemed to be boiling, and it was frozen in an instant, and her face was even paler. She didn't feel half a minute of temperature. Zhang Sha just smiled wordlessly, and his cold face stained with blood actually added a little warmth, and then raised his hand, gently put it on her thin shoulder, and slowly clenched it. The distance between the place where Xie Wei stood and the valley below was only a dozen feet. Daokan and Jianxia both changed their faces. Even though he rarely showed his archery skills in front of people, Xie Wei was never a true scholar who was powerless, and the castration of an arrow was so fierce that he even let out a sharp whistling sound when he broke through the air. It's just that this arrow is neither towards Jiang Xuaning nor towards Zhang Sha, but it swept over the heads of the two of them like thunder, and shot straight behind them. Xiao Dingfei. God knew that the moment he saw Xie Wei appear, he already knew that something was wrong, and he was short and ready to run away. I thought that Xie Wei hadn't noticed him. Who would have thought that this arrow was coming towards him? I could only hear a whoosh sound. How powerful was the carved arrow? In an instant, it pierced his shoulder, and after bringing out a stream of blood, even his whole body was shot backwards and fell to the ground. Everyone in the audience was stunned for a moment. At this time, he turned his head to look at Xiao Dingfei, only to find that this person had unknowingly hid in the back, and he was afraid that he would retreat into the thorn bushes behind him to hide if he gave him some more time. However, Xie Wei's cold arrow clearly extinguished all his hopes. A clear pain suddenly welled up between Zheng Ziyu's eyebrows, and the cold sweat on his forehead was dripping down instantly. However, when he fell into the blood-stained grass, and when he reached out and pressed his wound hard, a sneer hung on his lips for some reason, which was a little different from his usual lazy and unruly rebelliousness, and raised his eyes to look at Xie Wei, who was standing on a high place, with a sarcastic mockery on his face. Du Jun hated him after all. Even though he was dressed in a saint-like skin, he didn't care about him, but Xiao Dingfei had always been very self-aware and could see it clearly in his heart. I knew that he wouldn't let himself go easily. A drop of blood slid down the bowstring that was still trembling, and it looked a little shocking in the dim light of the sky. Xie Wei slowly lowered his arm. At this time, Daokan turned his head in a slight stunt, first caught a glimpse of the blood beads on the bowstring, and then looked at Xie Wei's fingers hanging low in the wide-sleeved robe, only to find that his fingertips had been cut by the bowstring because he had buckled the string for too long and too tightly, and blood was dripping down his fingertips. But he didn't react. Up and down the valley, there was silence. Daokan looked at it for a long time, but he didn't dare to say anything to remind him. After Xie Wei shot Xiao Dingfei down with an arrow, he only said, "Take it." As soon as Jianxia's eyelids jumped, he took someone down, immediately held down the injured Xiao Dingfei, and quickly took out a piece of clean cloth, plugged his mouth, and put people down. The rest of the people were surrounded by a group. Jiang Xuaning still maintained the posture of covering Jiang behind her, and she didn't know what she felt in her heart when she saw the carved arrow flying over her head. The only warmth came from the hand that was on her shoulder. The moment Xie Wei put down the bow, she felt that all the strength in her body had disappeared, and she almost fell to the ground with a soft foot. Sort of. Did you win the bet? Obviously, the result was what she wanted, but when the wind blew, she still felt a chill on her body. Just for the high place, Xie Wei's gaze that was silently watching her. She sinned against him again. Xie Wei stretched out his hand and handed the bow back to Daokan, as if he had just done nothing, and commanded, "Look at Lord Zhang's injury." Immediately someone went down to help Zhang Sha. He was really badly wounded. Jiang Xuaning stood beside her, still stunned. Xie Wei said to her calmly, "Ning Er, come up." If the peach slice cake he gave her in the palace at the beginning made her gradually eliminate her jealousy of Xie Wei in her previous life, then today he bent his bow to aim at Zhang Sha's arrow, and recalled all her fear of this person. This is the man who slaughtered the royal family. This is the one who exterminated the Xiao family. Is also the person who nailed the head of her henchman Zhou Yanzi to the palace gate. He has never been a good saint. But why? Why do you want to kill Zhang Sha? Obviously, they are all officials in the same dynasty. What's more, there was Xiao Shi intervening this time. Xiao Weishi didn't seem to be the kind of person who cared about who robbed him of his credit. She glanced back at Zhang Sha, and saw that the two soldiers were indeed bandaging his wounds, so she lowered her eyes, gently clenched the fingers hanging by her side, and finally walked towards Xie Wei step by step. Every step is thrilling as if stepping on the tip of a knife. His wide snow-white robe was lifted by the wind, and his calm gaze fell on her face as she approached, and there was a feeling that she was overwhelmed. Zhang Xuning buried her head and said, "Sir." Xie Wei looked at her cheeks that were scratched by thorns and blood, some messy black hair, and then looked at her blue lips and the wrinkled coarse cloth skirt on her body. Her eyebrows were clear, and said, "I just led the arrow. How did you stand in front of Master Zhang?" Zhang Xuning snorted and didn't dare to answer. Xie Wei chuckled casually, "The little girl's family is cranky. Don't you think that Mister is going to kill your sweetheart?" Words and sentences, hidden needles in the cotton. Zhang Xuning thought, how could there be such a person as Xie Juan in the world? At that moment, she clearly sensed his killing intent, but his calm and low smile at the moment seemed to be really her misunderstood, which only made her feel terrified. "She's shaking, Xie Wei said, "Look at you cold." He untied the thick crane on his body, raised his hand to drape it on her body, wrapped her slender body, and brushed away a strand of black hair hanging down her cheeks, before he said lightly, "Lord Zhang is very worried about you." The crane still has some residual warmth. The wind in the mountains was strong, and they were all blocked out at once. Zhang Xuning subconsciously raised her hand to hug the clothes, but felt that although this warmth wrapped her, it was separated by a layer, and it was difficult to enter the bottom of her heart. As soon as the next head is taught by heaven and others, he has already been caught. Xiao Yuan was even more nervous about his precious son, and after shouting to move the stone that pressed Xiao Ye away, he asked Xiao Ye to go out to find a doctor, but he didn't see others pressing Xiao Dingfei up. Zhang covered the wound and wrapped it hastily. The soldiers who came with him only knew a little about how to stop the bleeding, and if he really wanted to treat the wounds, he had to see the doctor, so when he saw that the blood was no longer flowing, the soldiers wanted to help him up. It's just that he shook his head and thanked him, and walked up by himself. Xie Wei lowered his hand, turned his eyes to see him, and still said to Zhang Xuning, "You didn't make a noise about your disappearance. Jing Zhong didn't know, only when you were sick. The matter of the eldest princess and her relatives has been decided, but I miss you a little. Thinking that you were frightened, Xiaobao, find a place in the nearby Guanzhong, clean it up and let Ning Er girl rest." That meant letting her go. Xiaobao was stunned for a moment, bowed down and agreed, and went to invite Zhang Xuning. Zhang Xuning hesitated and glanced at Zhang Wei. Xie Wei smiled lightly, "I took the lead in ambushing the heavenly sect this time, and I still have something to say with Lord Zhang." It turned out that this incident was his plan. No wonder everything is in the palm of your hand. Zhang Xuning felt bitter in her heart, although she didn't know how many shades were hidden behind it. She could guess that she should have broken Xie Wei's troubles, and even if she was worried about Zhang Sha at the moment, it seemed to be useless. She bowed and saluted again, and then turned around. When he moved, he saw Zhang Sha, who was silent on his cold and rigid face, his lips straightened, and he did not speak. Soon, she went far. The sky above me was getting gloomy, and it was about to snow. Xie Wei only had the snow-white robe left on his body. He was a little cold, standing in the wind, like a piece of snow, but he looked at the heavenly sect members at the bottom of the valley below who were already under the control of others and were waiting to be killed. After retrieving the bow first, Daikon led the people down and searched for something on the group. After a while, the man returned. But he tightened King Zio's brows, and whispered to Siawei, "It seems to be lost, I haven't seen it." Siawei lowered his eyes, waved his hand casually and said, "Kill them all. The archers have been standing on top." Hearing this, the tightly pulled bowstring was loosened, and there was a rain of arrows, falling towards the already defenseless heavenly sect members below, and they were all drenched in blood for a while, and they all fell to the ground and killed them cleanly. There was a strong smell of blood in the valley. Siawei then thought, it should also snow. Zhang Sha looked at his ruthless methods that did not leave half of his life silent, and remembered that in his previous life in prison, he was tortured, and after writing a sentence for himself, he only waited to be beheaded after the autumn, but he did not expect that day in the cold of spring, an unexpected visitor was ushered in. Is already in power, and he is still so unwavering. It's just that he felt that there was an indescribable deep silence in this person's body at that time, like heavy snow covering the ground, and the cold branches were quiet. He said that Ning Er died. Zhang Sha didn't know who he was talking about, he was at a loss. The other party paused for a moment, as if he realized that he didn't understand, and changed his words flatly, "Your mother is dead. Zhang Shru is in a dream." But he smiled and said to him, "She left a message, please let you go." But Yan Lin hated you to the bones, drunk and cried in front of her spirit for a few days, fell into the wine this morning, and raised his sword to kill you here. Master Zhang, that's amazing. Zhang Sha then felt that he had fallen into a cloud, and the cloud fell again, turning into a torrential rain, covering the lotus leaves that received the sky. In a trance, we met again in the afternoon shower in the summer resort. He is the Zhang Shilang who has a stinky and hard temper and doesn't give anyone a good face. She is the queen mother who laughs and doesn't make people unhappy. She deliberately stepped on the corner of his robe. He thought that if he was given a chance to re-elect, he would not bend down and tear the corners of his robe, and let her step on it, as long as she pleased, and step on it as long as she wanted. Then he was heard, and he got up, and had the door of the cell opened, and said to him, "Go away." The chains hanging from the cell door shook slightly. Zhang Sha was wearing a blood-stained prison uniform and sat in the prison for a long time before he laughed and said, "The criminal only wants to put incense on his mother." Afterward. Zhang Sha looked at Siawei in front of him from a distance, and felt that this person was a difficult mystery to the world, but this life seemed to have a little more human flavor to follow, not like the saint who was far away in the sky. Siawei neither walked over, nor did he ask him to come over, but said, "Dingguo Gong asked the saint for his life, rushed to the front and entered the city, ruined Xia's plan, and tired Master Zhang suffered a hardship, but fortunately, his life was safe, otherwise Xia would have been to blame." Zhang Sha said, "You are serious?" Siawei said, "My student Ning Er, stubborn temperament, relied on Lord Zhang to take care of him all the way, didn't cause you any trouble, right?" Zhang Sha listened to the word Ning Er, and remembered the ending that the person in front of him had chosen in his previous life, and felt that there might be some inside information that he didn't know, but he didn't have any disgust for Siawei, who was destined to become a chaotic minister and a thief. Is the world decided, and the hero should cook? Or is it something else? He said slowly, "Second girl Zhang, she is very clever and intelligent. It's just that the temper is still not very suppressed." Siawei saw that he never came over, so he laughed. Master Zhang doesn't seem to agree with Xia very much. He glanced at the corpses that had been stacked by the sect below, and his eyes were blank. Zhang Sha just lowered his eyes, took out an object from his sleeve, and said calmly, "Young Master Xia is the one who is looking for this thing, right?" Between his fingers was a thin half-page. It was the secret letter of the Dujun mountain people taken by Feng Minjiao, the left minister of the heavenly sect before. The corners of Xie Wei's eyes twitched slightly. Dayakan is even more heartbroken. Zhang Sha handed the page to Dayakan, recalling all kinds of confusion in his previous life, and he got the answer when he saw the handwriting on this page. Who let him see such handwriting in his previous life? It's just a disturbance, what does it have to do with him? He looked at Xie Wei and said, I just thought, since this is a secret letter sent by Mr. Dujun, who is the god dragon of the heavenly sect, maybe he can get a glimpse of it and wipe out the chaotic party. It was to be careful and take advantage of the chaos to receive this letter. The journey is trivial, and it is difficult to describe it in one word. If young Master Xie has nothing to do, he will wait until he is official. When Dayakan took the secret letter, he quietly buckled the knife in his sleeve with his other hand. He also looked at Xie Wei. Secretly the killing machine is on the verge of breaking out. Xie Wei couldn't help but wonder how much Zhang Sha knew about this trip, and whether he really didn't know anything about returning this secret letter. If Lucien was here, most of the arrow just now would have pierced this person's head. For a while, he was fascinated by the ghost and left him alive until this moment, and when he saw the secret letter, he was afraid that he would not do anything but do it, and would rather kill 1,000 mistakes than let go of one. He slowly raised his fingers, and when he felt a little pain, he lowered his eyes and saw that Fang had just opened his bow and led the arrow to cut the bowstring's hand, so he tasted a little ridiculous, and suddenly looked at Zhang Sha, and said quite funny, Ning Er said that he likes you. Zhang Sha's body froze sharply. Xie Wei looked at the bottom of his eyes, pulled the corners of his lips, and tasted interested. I'm a gentleman, I'm quite curious, do you also belong to her? Chapter 132, Old Name and Surname. Walking all the way back to the front mountain, all the way to the road is full of rocks, and corpses are everywhere. Occasional glances may also see severed limbs, and the eyes are blind. Although Zhang Xuning is also a person who died once in her previous life, she couldn't help but be shocked when she saw such a scene. Xiaobao guessed that she was probably afraid of such a bloody and cruel scene, so he walked diagonally in front of her, blocking most of the cruel scenes with his own figure, all the way over the back mountain courtyard wall. Although the Shangqing temple is occupied by the heavenly sect, the basic pattern of the Taoist temple has not changed at all. In front is the Taoist temple, and in the back is the residence of the Taoist priests. It's just that there are no real Taoist priests at the moment, leaving many vacant houses behind the view. Xiaobao cleaned up a room for Zhang Xuning and said, Mr. ordered, second Miss Zhang will rest here first. It is expected that Mr. and Master Zhang will still have something to talk about, and the injury of the prince on Dingguagong's side does not seem to be light, but I am afraid that he will not be able to return to Beijing for the time being, and he will be in this place for a few days. He also made a pot of tea. At the end, he talked to the people outside, and even brought 2 sets of brand new clothes. This is a temporary pair of clothes that someone bought in the city, and the sword scholar said that it is naturally far worse than the fashionable style in the capital, but he can only reluctantly grieve the girl first. Zhang Xuning was still wearing the crane that Xie Wei had just tied for her, and there was a layer of ferret fur embedded inside, which was warm just against her body. She glanced at the 2 suits. A set of water blue and a set of light purple, although it is indeed not as good as those exquisite workmanship in Beijing, but the style is also elegant and appropriate. It can be seen that it has been selected with heart. It's just that this clothes were sent by Xie Wei's people, and to her, it was a little strange. She was apprehensive in her heart, and she couldn't laugh, so she only looked at Xiaobao and said, It turns out that you are Mr. Xie's person. Xiaobao said, If there is no internal response, Mr. will not dare to take risks. He had a straight face when he spoke, not at all like when he was in contact with Zhang Xuning a few days ago, His elder sister called shortly, and he didn't even look at her with his eyes on it, but it seemed that he was not very happy, and he looked a little angry. Jiang Xuning then remembered the early morning. The child drugged her food, causing her to leave the site of the heavenly sect on the pretext of seeing a doctor, and told her to hide in the inn across the street. But she didn't want to go back, and when she found out that the Yongding pharmacy was fake, she rushed to the government office and risked her life. Nothing was expected by Xie Wei. That's why Xie Wei was so angry. This child is afraid that he will be ordered to save her, but if Xie Wei didn't see her at the inn, I'm afraid that he will also be punished, right? Jiang Xuning is not a heartless person, and when she thinks of this section, she can't help but feel a little guilty for affecting others, but the fact that Jiang covered up the Yongding pharmacy was fake, and it really made her doubt Xie Wei's intentions. After all, Xie Wei was not a good person in her mind. So although all kinds of thoughts passed through her heart, she only fell silent in the end. Xiaobao packed up all the things, half-covered the window for her, fetched water for washing, and lit a stove in the house before saying, "I'm going out, it's not far away, and the second girl Jiang can call me if she has something." He exited and closed the door. Jiang Xuning couldn't calm down and rest. As soon as she closed her eyes, her mind was full of overlapping faces of Jiang Wei and Xie Wei, which made her heart tremble. She untied the crane that was draped on her body and gently placed it next to the two neatly folded women's dresses. The snow-white satin was not stained with any blood and dust, but it was the same as its owner, like standing high in the sky and looking down on all beings. Xie Juan. What does he have to say to Jiang Sha? Jiang Xuning sat in the house for a while, but after all, she couldn't sit still, got up and stood under the eaves outside, looking in the direction of the back mountain. There are many ancient pines planted in the courtyard. There is a long road leading to this place from the gate of the back mountain, but at this moment there are many soldiers guarding both sides, and whoever passes by this road can see it clearly from her. But after looking at it for a long time, I didn't see Jiang Sha. Her heart couldn't help but hang high. It wasn't until almost 2 moments had passed that I saw the soldiers on guard looking in the direction behind them, bowing slightly forward, as if they were saluting someone. Jiang Xuning's heart jumped suddenly. Then, I finally saw the familiar figure walking out of the back mountain. The wounds on his body had been hastily bandaged, but his dark blue robe had already been soaked in blood and turned into an inky color, and his face was even more pale from excessive blood loss. It's okay. He's fine. At the moment when she saw that he was safe and sound, Jiang Xuning only felt that her heart was so full that it was about to overflow, and she walked towards him uncontrollably. "Lord Jiang." Jiang Sha's expression was like a tree. She was only full of joy when she saw him, and she didn't notice this small detail, and a smile already bloomed on her lips. "It's good that you're okay." "That's great." Before the words fell, the whole person's eyelids were a little heavier, he blinked hard, his body shook slightly, and he fainted directly. Jiang Sha was shocked in his heart, but fortunately he reacted quickly and caught her. The girl's slender waist was not in her hands, her cheeks were fair and thin, but she was tired from the rush of these days, her eyelids were gently closed, and the 2 slender willow eyebrows were also stretched. It was as if he was asleep. Xiao Beiyuan was watching from the other side of the eaves, and when he saw Jiang Xuning fainting, he was already startled, and he was about to rush down to help people. But when he saw Jiang Sha catching people, he couldn't help but stop. After a distance, he saw Xie Wei standing quietly on the other side of the road, looking at the scene in the distance, but he didn't come over. The expression on the face of the nearby Master Zhang changed several times, and finally returned to a cold silence. Only the second girl Zhang, who had already fallen asleep, was hugged by the waist, walked past him, gently put it back on the bed in the room, and carefully tucked the quilt for her. Asterisk. It's finally snowing. The sky over Tongzhou City was covered with clouds, the wind was howling, and it was a little cold from the middle of the day, and at dusk, it began to snow heavily. Snowflakes like goose feathers flew down from the sky, and in less than half an hour, the roof tiles in the city were white, and there were clumps of snow piled up on the strong pines of the low mountain in Shanqingguan, which looked like rime from a distance. If Xiao Dingfei is not mistaken, this is the weather that Xie Wei hates the most. Jinling is in the south and it rarely snows. But over time, there are inevitably some exceptions. There was a year when the cold went south, and a gust of wind knocked on the window at night, and when I got up in the morning, I saw that the rockery pavilions were all in the snow. Inside and outside Jinling City, elegant people gathered, but they were elated and invited to enjoy the snow. Of course, there are also some gentlemen who come to invite him. At that time, Xie Wei had not yet participated in the imperial examination, but he was already well known in Jinling. Xiao Dingfei wants to embroider a pillow and a bag of grass by himself. These personal vassals are elegant and have to write poems and paintings. It is better to call Xie Wei to go with him. It just so happens that he is rare. Unexpectedly, when he went to the courtyard, he saw that the courtyard was closed. All the servants in the courtyard were busy clearing the snow. Xiao Dingfei felt strange. This snow hasn't stopped yet, and it looks like it will rain for some time, so you will sweep it up at this time, and pile it up again after a while, isn't it in vain? The people in Zhejun's courtyard were silent. And no one answered him. On the corridor, Jianshu came over with a bowl of medicine, and when he saw him, he paused and said, "Dingfei Gongzi, Mr. is not going out today, please go back." Xiao Dingfei wondered, "He's sick?" Jianshu said, "I occasionally feel the wind and cold." Xiao Dingfei suddenly felt bored, shrugged his shoulders, and wanted to leave. It's just that at the moment of turning around, the corner of his eye flickered, and he caught a glimpse of when Jianshu Duanyao opened the door. A thick opaque black curtain floated out of the door, and in the broad daylight, there were faint rays of light from a few lines of light and candles. His heart jumped. Soon the door was closed. Xiao Dingfei felt a bit strange paradox, but when his curiosity rose, he couldn't help but think about what his position was in the sect, and he didn't dare to ask anything after all, let alone stay in this courtyard for a long time. The servants who were clearing the snow outside were still busy. He suppressed his secret suspicions, and quickly slipped out to enjoy the snow with the gang. It's just that after so many years, the scene he saw that day still crossed his mind from time to time, leaving a huge mystery in the depths of his memory. Originally, such a big thing today, Xie Wei shot him with an arrow, and obviously came to him. But seeing the heavy snow in Shangqing, Xiao Dingfei felt that this person was afraid that he would not come. At least it won't come during the day. Sure enough, it was not until the sky was dark and the entire Taoist temple was completely shrouded in darkness that there was a dim lantern in front of him, illuminating the road that had been swept clean, towards his room. Jianshu and Dayakan both followed him. One person carries a lantern, and the other holds an umbrella. When he arrived at the front of the steps, he hung the lantern and put away the oil umbrella, and then he stepped forward and pushed open the door, and saw him first, but he called out very politely, "Dingfei Gongzi." Xiao Dingfei had already laid back on the bed. There was a stove in the house, and it was hot. He was wearing only a white middle coat, and the arrow that had pierced his shoulder had been removed, and the wound had been coated with good gold medicine, which had already stopped the bleeding, but the doctor told him not to move at will, but to recuperate. Xie Wei then came in. The face is calm and the eyes are deep. The long clothes are like snow, and the wooden hairpin is black, and he is indeed a real hermit of the world. The sword book closed the door behind him. The bright candle light shone on the window paper, dispelling a little of the snow reflected outside, making his face look more and more peaceful. Xie Wei said, "Your legs and feet are very good." Xiao Dingfei laughed locally, but it's not as fast as Mr. S arrow. Xiawei didn't smile. It's a pity that the head is not accurate enough. Why didn't I shoot your head down? Xiao Dingfei knew that he had murderous intentions towards him, stared at him, and said half-jokingly, "Who called me Mr. You still of great use? I know that Mr. Xia hates me the most." Xiawei put one hand on the edge of the table and did not speak. Xiao Dingfei also had no expression on his face, and only said, "Who told me to use your most hated surname? Over the years, I'm afraid that if I listen to it once, I will hate it once, overlap and repeat, get deeper and deeper, and never dissolve, right?"